Hi everybody, thanks for joining me today. This is an exciting presentation. So you're seeing the best presentation in all of CA world right here. We're going to talk about service virtualization and how it has been one of the most transformational technologies in the past 10 years. So as our announcer said, I'm an industry analyst and I've been writing about and covering service virtualization since 2007 when it first came on the scene. So we've written a lot about it, we have a lot of data, and I'll share some of that data with you. Then we're going to take a look ahead and see how this transformational technology can really help you to have better products deployed, deploy them with more confidence, and have your teams be more confident. So how many of you out there are using service virtualization today? Okay, how many of you are thinking of using service virtualization? Okay, so we have a pretty good mix. So let's go ahead and get started. First, we have our legal slide saying this is just informational only, so thanks. So let's take a look at the agenda and what we want to talk about today. I want to talk a little bit about changing our perspective, the way we think about how we interact with our line of business, with our software engineering team, how we can do things better and how we can act differently. And then take a look at some service virtualization statistics that we've gathered over the years about how service virtualization works, the benefits that it derives for you, and the ROI that you can get from service virtualization. And then take a look ahead at what's in store for service virtualization and how you can be more confident because of this powerful technology. And then ultimately, how you can use service virtualization as well as related products to help protect your brand and your business. And then conclude with a summary. So let's think a little bit about our perspective. We constantly hear that we have to change and things are changing rapidly, and that's all true. And we have to think about the way we change our interactions with our whole software engineering team, how we work with our line of business differently, and just think a little bit differently. And that's very helpful because oftentimes change is a very, very difficult thing for people. So before we get started, I just want to ask a few questions. So how many of you drive regularly in the United States? Okay, so everybody drives regularly. What color is a stop sign? What color? Red. Okay, everybody's saying red. What shape is a stop sign? It's an octagon, right? Okay. What color is a yield sign? What color? Yellow? Yellow. Okay, I'm hearing yellow. Any other colors? All right, what shape's a yield sign? Triangle. Okay, yield sign. In 1971, the US Department of Transportation changed the color of the yield sign from yellow to red. 1971, so that's almost 50 years that we've had a yield sign as red. And when I show this, I often get people saying, well, no, I live in, name your favorite state, and it's definitely, not red there, it's definitely yellow. And they never write back and say, yeah, it's yellow in my state. So it's just a different way of thinking. The yield sign hasn't been yellow since 1971, yet we still think of it as yellow. So we have to just change the way we think about things, change our perspective on things, and change the way we think about how we're working with our software. So one of the philosophies that I live by is that today's solutions are tomorrow's problems. And we've seen this over the past several years. We've had this great mindset shift of the 21st century. The developers started to say, everything needs to be faster. We need to just code, go faster, 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 and release, release, release. Well, what happened with that is we created a lot of customer fatigue because we were releasing, quite honestly, a lot of bugs. We were continuously releasing bugs into our software. And some people revolted by not wanting to use the applications that we're building. And people said, we have to slow down and we have to take a look at what we're doing from a quality perspective. So the mindset shift was, let's just go faster and ship. And nobody was really worried about quality. Nobody was worried about the functional product working. Nobody was worrying about the performance, and nobody was worrying about the security of the product. So this gives people who were working on the testing side, on the QA side, a really great opportunity. Because what we really need to focus on, not just shipping, we need to focus on protecting that brand and that business. We want to be able to protect the brand and the business of the organization that we're working for. And we can do that with some of these great technologies. And these stats that I'm showing you, they come from a recent survey that we did, and we always ask people, what do you value most when you're releasing software? Do you value time to market, do you value quality, or do you value cost? And in this survey, for the very first time, we've been asking this question for 10 years. And for the very first time, people came back and said, we value quality more than time to market. Only by 2 percentage points in this particular piece of data, but this means that that pendulum is starting to shift now, where people are more concerned about quality than time to market. Yes, we still have to deal with those competitive pressures and those time to market pressures, but people want to rely on the software that you're putting out there. They want the business to be delighted. They want to be able to use that software and have it provide something meaningful for them. And you notice that only 8% of the people said they were worried about cost. But the interesting thing is, in this survey, people told us, we don't worry about costs, but our costs are out of control. You know, none of our managers have come to us and said, you have to rein your cost in. So this is just something to think about in your own organization. What do you value most, and where are your costs? Are you really concerned about rework? So let's take a look at some service virtualization stats. You know, we said service virtualization is a technology that's been around for 10 years. It is a proven technology, it is a mature technology, and it gives you that access to services, components, databases, environments, sensors for IoT that might be incomplete or unavailable to you as a developer or as a tester. What service virtualization really does is it says that you can collaborate between the development and test teams, and it allows the testers to keep pace with the developers so that you can make those time to market demands. So some of the service virtualization stats that we have talk about waiting. We know 84% of people said that their QA work was delayed because of unavailable services, components, databases, architectures, mobile environments, sensors, and so on. And 81% said their development work was delayed for the same reason. This means there is a lot of waiting going on in organizations. They're waiting to have access to those things that may not be complete. They're waiting to have access to those things that might be unavailable or something that is fee-based. So there's a lot of waiting going on. And when you wait, what you're doing is you're eating into that precious schedule that you have to meet your time to market demand, and you're just increasing costs. And so when you're waiting, you might not be necessarily testing everything because you're waiting for those services or those components to be available for you for your development purposes or for your test purposes. We asked people in surveys that we did, how many systems, components, services, and so on do you need for your development and testing activity? And the answer we got back was, on average, people said they needed complete, unrestricted access to 52 services, components, databases, sensors, and so on for their development and testing activities. And then we said, okay, so you need access to 52. How many do you really have unrestricted access to? 23. People need access to 52, but they only have complete, unrestricted access to 23 systems, components, services, database, and so on for their development and test activities. So what happens to those other 29 services, components, and systems, and so on? Means one, maybe they just don't get tested. They go to production live with 52 services and so on that they need access to with only access to 23. The other 29 they don't test. That means they're not doing end-to-end testing. So they may not test those other 29, or they may just say, we're just going to go to production because we're up against our release schedule and we have to go live. So that means you're going live with not a whole lot of confidence. So the confidence is shattered. Then you go live and you have that unknown, untested, unremediated defect that pops up in production, and it causes problems for everybody. So service virtualization gives you access to everything you need when you need it, for as long as you need it. We also asked people how long they waited to access the required systems. They need 52 systems, they only have access to 23. And we said, on average, how long do you wait if you are not using service virtualization? And on average, they wait 32 days. So 32 days is an eternity for today's software engineering teams. So they wait a long time to access what they need. They don't necessarily have access to everything that they need. And so you're getting not very good software going into production. So the ROI from service virtualization is very, very powerful. And these numbers up on the screen are the numbers that we got from surveying over 500 people from around the world who were using service virtualization, and this is what we found. They said that they're able to reproduce their defects far more quickly because of service virtualization. So that mean time to reproduction of a defect doesn't take as long. And there's not finger pointing because they have this environment that they can actually work in. They also said that going to production, they have fewer defects. They have fewer defects overall, not just production defects, but there are fewer defects overall because they're testing constantly, because they have access to everything they need, whether it is unavailable or incomplete. They have access to everything they need. They also told us that they're able to increase their test coverage. They're able to run more tests, they're able to run more tests on more environments and on more platforms, which is critical for today's mobile world and the explosion and proliferation of devices that we have. They said that they were also able to increase their test execution and they were able to reduce their testing cycle. And that's one of the problems that we hear all of the time, is people will say, well, it just takes too long to test. The testers are slowing us down. Service virtualization gives testers a way to keep pace with developers. That's a very powerful aspect of service virtualization, giving testers a way to keep pace with developers. And we also know that by using service virtualization, overall organizations had a reduced software release cycle time. So it took them less time to release what they were about to put into production because they knew what they had. They were able to test anytime, any place with anything they needed. And they were able to share these virtualized assets across their whole software supply chain. And when you think about your software supply chain, it's not just the people in your own development and test organization. It is maybe an offshore team that you're using. Maybe it's an outsourcer that you're using, another partner. Maybe it's another team within your own organization that you're working with. So this whole software supply chain comes into play, and everybody's able to share these virtualized assets with service virtualization. The other really wonderful thing that service virtualization gives you is it is stateful. That means that it represents realistic behavior. And that's often a problem for a tester or for a developer trying to reproduce a defect. Service virtualization allows you to represent realistic behavior. You can take those virtualized assets that you've created, share them across that whole supply chain, across that whole software supply chain, and you can also modify the behavior of those virtualized assets to show different behavioral conditions. You can speed something up, you can slow something down, you can put a different type of input into a field and so on. So you can change that behavior because service virtualization is stateful. And this is one of the things that development teams and testing teams benefit from because of that statefulness. Statefulness is a very powerful capability because oftentimes software is changing right up until the last minute, but service virtualization gives you that way to be able to simulate and emulate anything you need for as long as you need it. So statefulness is a very powerful component of service virtualization. And the ROI that people experience is very quick and very powerful. So we know that service virtualization helps to build confidence in teams because they can confidently ship something that they're familiar with. They know where their defects are. It's quicker for them to reproduce defects. So service virtualization is this super, super powerful technology that helps you give more confidence to your software engineering teams, and it helps you to increase collaboration. So with service virtualization, the way to think of it, if you're new to service virtualization, is service virtualization gives you what you need for as long as you need it. So you get everything you need, those things that might be incomplete, unavailable, fee-based. You have to pay a fee to access somebody else's mainframe, or you have to pay a fee to access an API where you might be doing map testing, for example. So service virtualization gives you complete access to that. It brings an unparalleled level of collaboration between your developers and your testers. And we've heard so much about the need for collaboration between the different stakeholders within our software engineering teams. So service virtualization gives you that complete collaboration between developers and testers. And service virtualization gives you statefulness. So those are three big, powerful pieces of service virtualization. And if you think about it, with all of the marketing hype that we hear, with everything that we read in the trade press, You would think that software engineering, that developing a software application is easy. You just think about it and automatically your software application is written, it's tested, it's deployed into production, and people love it. The fact of the matter is we still don't have a lot of collaboration between different stakeholders on the teams. We hear a lot about the need for collaboration, but we don't have a whole lot of collaboration. We know that testers are often behind because developers are moving ahead. And we also know that this collaboration just doesn't exist across the board. So service virtualization removes wait times, it removes uncertainty, and it removes those constraints that a developer or tester might run into. So if you're removing those constraints, you're removing wait times, you're removing uncertainty, it makes perfect sense to start with service virtualization as a part of every software project you're working with. So if you're creating something new, bring service virtualization in. If you're working on something legacy and you're modernizing it, bring service virtualization in. And the number one question I get from people is they'll say, well, service virtualization is great, but we're not really sure how to expand it. We use it on this one project and we got great ROI, all the ROI numbers that you showed us, we saw that, but we're not really sure how to expand the use of it in our organization. Ultimately, what you want is you want every single piece of software code that is checked in, you want a virtualized asset along with that, so that you can run an end-to-end test, you can run an isolated test, you can run a test against it at any point. You can reproduce a defect far easier. But that oftentimes is not realistic. Oftentimes organizations push back and there'll be a lot of struggle in organizations to expand the use of service virtualization. So the way I answer the question about how do I get other people in my enterprise as excited about service virtualization as I am, tell them a few ways to get started with it. Using service virtualization from the very beginning to get that unparalleled collaboration between development and testers and remove those constraints, wait times, and uncertainties. So the number one way you can start with service virtualization is use it for anything that is fee-based that you have to access to develop against or to test against. So if you need to test against somebody's mainframe and it costs you X cents every time you go and ping their mainframe, or if they say you can only have access to it on Saturday nights from 2 in the morning till 3 in the morning, you don't want to put your developers and testers through that stress. Anything that is fee-based, use service virtualization so you can simulate and emulate what you're doing. And you can see that tremendous savings right out of the chute. Because one of the problems is people will say, well, it only costs 2 cents to do that. But 2 cents adds up, or 50 cents adds up. And we see this all the time where there might be performance issues with mainframes. There might be performance issues with APIs. APIs may not be available. Or it may be too expensive to access third-party APIs. So anything that's fee-based, you can start service virtualization with. Another great way to get started with service virtualization is anything that you're using as core technology within your organization. So virtualizing assets for something like login, for example. Anything that is core technology and is used in multiple products within your organization, virtualize it. Virtualize all those assets and use them. And you'll see how easy it is to be able to change the behavior of them, represent that composite behavior, and share it across everybody involved. If you're working with a complete software supply chain, a software supply chain that is in your own organization as well as outside of your organization, use service virtualization for that. Demand that any partner that you're working with, whether it is an offshore partner, an outsourced partner, demand that they too are using service virtualization so you can test better, you can reproduce those defects better, and you can know what you're going into production with. And then ultimately what will happen is people will start to see the benefit of service virtualization. They'll see that ROI and they'll say, yes, that makes sense. Let's use it across the entire enterprise. So those are just ways to get used to service virtualization. What service virtualization does for you is it allows you to test and fail in isolation. You don't want your customers to be your testers. You don't want to put something out that you're uncertain of and say, well, because we needed access to 52 systems and we really only had access to 23, there are 29 systems out there that I'm really not sure what's going to happen with it. Let's put it in production and let's ask our users what happens. Let's ask our customers what happens. So allow people, allow your testers, allow your developers to test and fail in isolation. And that's what service virtualization gives you as well. So use service virtualization from the beginning. Start with service virtualization on every single project. We've all heard the phrase shift left now for a number of years. And with service virtualization, we really do want to shift left. We want to be able to release with more confidence. We know from the stats that I showed that people are more concerned with a quality experience from their software than time to market. So if you're really concerned with that quality experience, release software with confidence by shifting left. And when you shift left with service virtualization, what you're able to do is give your developers, your testers, your partners, your offshore teams, anybody in your software supply chain is able to spin up an environment that is production-like. So you can go in there and you can test, you can develop, and you're doing that from the beginning, and you can stay in there and test as long as you like, especially for performance testing. And performance is one of those non-functional requirements that we have largely ignored over the past decade. But as we see more mobile applications, as we see more IoT types of applications coming along, performance is going to be a major driver. So with service virtualization, you can shift left, give developers and testers those environments that are production-like so they can actually test as long as they want with anything they want, because with service virtualization, they're able to simulate and emulate anything they need. Services, components, APIs, databases, infrastructures, mainframes, and so on. So release with confidence. Allow your team to be confident in what they're putting out to production. And this will ultimately have the side effect of increasing morale within your team. And we've seen it a number of times. People have said that before they used service virtualization, their teams were not necessarily very happy about what they were doing. They were not necessarily very confident with what they were releasing. Once they brought service virtualization in, their confidence level increased tremendously. So release quality with confidence, shift left with service virtualization, and give your developers and testers what they need to be able to test for as long as they need, at any time they need. And we now know that devices are proliferating at a rapid rate. Environments are proliferating at a rapid rate. Everybody in here is probably running on a different version of a different operating system, different versions of the same operating system, and so on. And you have to test all of that. Testing is far more important now than it has ever been. It often seems as though testing has been excluded from some of the movements that we've seen in the past, but testing is coming back now very, very strong. And people are saying, we need to test earlier. We need to test earlier than just waiting to say, okay, we're going to get a production-like environment for maybe 10 days, something like that. We need to test earlier. We need to test more. We need to test on more operating systems, more environments, more devices, more locations, more scenarios. There are new scenarios that are coming about all the time. We need to be able to test for these things that were not necessarily true maybe a couple of years. We need to be able to test longer. So your testers should be able to run a test at any time they like, an end-to-end test. Your software supply chain should be able to run an end-to-end test at any time they like. So you want to be able to test longer, you want to be able to test harder, you want to be able to push the systems as much as you possibly can. You want to be able to make sure that your application is going to be able to perform at scale. So you want to be able to test earlier in the life cycle, test more platforms, test more devices, test longer and test harder, and that's what service virtualization gives you. Service virtualization gives you all of that because you have access to those incomplete, unavailable services, and it allows collaboration between the development teams and the test teams. So we've heard about service virtualization and how powerful the technology has been over the past 10 years and where it's going. How you can actually test earlier, how you can shift left with service virtualization, and how you can really make service virtualization stick within your organization and make it sticky so that the developers and the testers love using it. Ultimately, you want to protect the brand and the business. We said at the beginning of the presentation that we've moved beyond this idea of let's just ship. Let's just focus on time to market. We have to be concerned about quality. That has to be our #1 job right now, is quality and protecting the brand and the business. And there are a number of other technologies that work with service virtualization to help you get more power and more benefits from service virtualization. So let's take a look at some of those technologies that can help you protect your brand and your business along with service virtualization. We call this lifecycle virtualization. From an analyst perspective, we call it lifecycle virtualization. We talk about bringing virtualization technologies to the pre-production portion of the software lifecycle. So one of the problems is people don't have environments. Service virtualization is going to allow us to have this environment that we can test in, but we want to make sure that it is as close to production as possible. We know that oftentimes people have physical labs, and they have to spend time scheduling time in that physical lab in order to test or to reproduce defects for developers. We know that people wait on average of 18 days to get into a physical lab. And we also know that it costs on average of $12 million to maintain those physical labs per year. So if you use a lab technology or service virtualization, you have that environment as close to production as possible for testing and development. And then we have service virtualization, and we saw the power of service virtualization and the incredibly profound ROI that you get with service virtualization. And then we have test data virtualization. And test data virtualization really works well with service virtualization, because what test data virtualization does is it helps you make sure that that test data that you're using is going to be secure. If you think about it, when you're testing an application, data is one of the biggest things you have to be concerned about. Am I testing the right data? Is it the right data structure? Is it the right size? Can it scale? And so on. But you don't want to test with real live data. I was at a conference a couple of years ago where there were some presenters from a credit card company. They were giving a presentation on how to create test data. They gave this great presentation. At the end of the presentation, the #1 question was, well, where did you get this data? And they said, well, we go to our DBA and we sign a non-disclosure with our DBA, and we say that we'll destroy the data after we're done testing. This was a profound moment for everybody in the room. They were a credit card company, and everybody was concerned that their personal information, their name, their address, their account number, their account information, their social security number, and so on, was going to be revealed. So test data virtualization gives you the right structure of data, the right size of data, the right type of data, and it is protected. So you don't have to worry about testing with production data. It is data as close to production as possible. So that helps take care of a security component of the applications that you're developing. And then defect virtualization. So many of us are so used to using software with defects that have been in there for so long that they've become features. And if you talk to the people that develop the software, they'll even say, yeah, you know, we don't know how to fix that. We have workarounds, we publish workarounds. If you use defect virtualization, and defect virtualization is one of those solutions that really helps you identify a defect, whether it's legacy source code or current source code, it helps you identify where that defect is. The way defect virtualization works is your application runs, and then when it fails, a URL is created, and you're able to go back and see where that application actually failed. And you can go in and look at the defect and say, yes, we need to remediate it, or no, we're just going to let it go. And a very, very popular example of defect virtualization was back in 2008, there was a high-frequency trading firm called Knight Capital. And they were doing great. And they had this piece of software they knew in 2008 that there was a defect in it, but they could never reproduce it. They could never find it because it was too expensive to build out a physical lab, to be able to figure out everything, to have that environment as close to production as possible. So that defect was there in 2008. In 2012, they rolled out a new version of their software, and that defect manifested itself. And in 2012, when they rolled out the new version of the software, they went in 40 minutes, they lost $450 million, and by December, that was in August, by December, the company was no more. So those defects are living out there in your software, and you want to find them and remediate them as quickly as you possibly can. So what do we know about service virtualization? Service virtualization removes constraints. It removes wait times. It removes uncertainties. You want to have that high level of collaboration between your developers and your testers. You want your testers to be able to keep pace with your developers. And you want to use service virtualization from the beginning. Ideally, you want to have every single piece of source code that you check in with virtualized assets. So if that's not the case, start with fee-based systems and you'll be able to show a very, very quick ROI. You want to shift left with service virtualization to release with more confidence. And you want to use service virtualization to be able to test earlier in the life cycle. Test more platforms, test more devices, and test longer. Test anytime you like. And ultimately, what you're going to do is you're going to have access to everything you need, when you need it, for as long as you need it, for development and testing. And just wanted to say that I love service virtualization so much that I wrote a book about lifecycle virtualization. So I have the lifecycle virtualization book available on Amazon if you're interested in reading more about it. It's really geared towards the decision maker. It's a pretty interesting book. Again, my name's Teresa Lanowitz. I'm an industry analyst. If you want to find out more about us, there's our website. Take our surveys, influence our research, influence the way vendors work with software, the types of products that they put out there, and follow me on Twitter at VokeInc.com. Thanks so much for coming and have a great rest of the conference.